heavily medicated on sinus medicine and stuff, and it keeps me a little loopy. But anyway, it caught me off guard, so we got in the car this morning, and Grady's like, change the clock. I'm like, oh, it was time change, wasn't it? So, but anyway, at least it's fall. You gain an hour, you don't lose an hour, and your phone automatically resets. Because if your phone didn't automatically reset, I probably would have been late for church this morning because I completely forgot about it, or early. But anyway, if you have your Bible, turn to 1 Samuel chapter number 15. 1 Samuel chapter number 15, and this is probably going to be the last time we're going to be in 1 Samuel for a while. 1 Samuel 15, once you move out of 1 Samuel 15 into chapter 16 and 17, you really are going to move into Saul and David, and you're almost going to have to do a study on David, and I don't know that I'm ready to do that right yet. And if I did, we'd probably be here, we'd still be looking at it until this time next year. And so I feel like this is probably a good stopping point for this, and we'll move on to some other things. So we're just going to close out chapter number 15, and Lord willing, we'll look at something next week, something different next week, and maybe some different things instead of just, on one certain topic. But in 1 Samuel chapter number 15, and obviously we weren't here last week, so we were here, but we didn't have Sunday school last week. But we know that this chapter is where Samuel comes to Saul at the beginning of the chapter, and he tells him that exactly what God wants him to do. And I don't think in this day and age I almost think we take advantage of the fact that we live under grace. And I don't think that we take God serious enough at times. And so, but here is an example of just how precise that God is. And so Samuel tells him that he wants him to destroy the Amalekites, and he wants to destroy the Amalekites, man, woman, child, and all their animals. And so Saul goes out, and he goes out and he goes against the Amalekites, and he destroys the Amalekites. But he chose to save Agag the king, and he chose to save the best of the cattle and the best of the sheep. And if you remember, it was Saul that did it, and then the people followed. And if you remember from the previous chapter, where the people wouldn't even taste the honey when they weren't starving, but they were extremely hungry. And Jonathan took that honey, and they're like, your dad said we're not supposed to eat. He made a vow. And so the people were not going to do anything that Saul didn't allow them to do. And so the people follow. They follow. And so then in verse number 13 it says, and Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, blessed be thou of the Lord, I perform the commandment of the Lord. Now, if you remember, I'm not exactly sure where it's at right now. I'm missing it right here. But if you remember, as they're going up, after they've defeated the Amalekites, Saul sets him up a place. He sets himself up a place, and he's like, hey, we're going to set up a little shrine to me, Saul, defeating the Amalekites. and we're gonna see that, but he sets him up a place. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if you remember, after the Philistines were defeated, even though Saul really didn't have a whole lot to do with the Philistines whenever Goliath was defeated, Saul didn't have a whole lot to do with it, because for 40 days Goliath comes out and challenged the army. He defied the army of Israel, and Saul sat there and took it for 40 days. And the army of Israel sat there and took it 40 days, and it took David to come out and say, is there not a cause, and come out and fought Goliath. But if you remember, when they came back when they came back, the girls were out there singing, and they were singing, Saul has slain his 1,000 and David his 10,000s. And so here's Saul, and it was a public show, and Samuel's going to call him out in a minute. And he said, when you're little in your own eyes, I'm gonna phrase it my way. When you were little in your own eyes, you were a better man. Once you got all puffed up and got used to being the king and realizing it was about you, it wasn't a good thing for you. So here he comes, and God told Samuel, what Saul had done, and he tells Samuel that he wants him to go and tell him that, that he's being rejected at being king, and Samuel cries all night long, and I believe he cried and prayed and tried to get God to change his mind, and God said no, not going to do it. So when you get there to verse number 13, it says, Samuel came to Saul, and he, blessed be thou of the Lord. So here he is, and he's putting on a show. A lot about Saul is show. It's a lot of show, Brother Parks. It's a lot of, look at me, look what I've done, look what I've done is a key word right there. Look what I've done. We've done what God said. And Samuel was a no-nonsense. He was a no-nonsense preacher. Don't you like no-nonsense preachers? Actually, let me rephrase that. I don't mind a little nonsense. Brother Green would tell a few jokes when he got up. Brother Randy tells jokes, and Zach thinks they're terrible, but that's okay. I don't mind a little bit of that. But once it's preaching time, Samuel was a no-nonsense preacher. He just said, oh, yeah? Well, what meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? Now, I don't know. Apparently, the cows moo differently. The Amalekite cows moo differently than Israelite cows. And apparently, the sheep, they low differently, from the Amalekites, because somehow Samuel was able to recognize the difference between an Israelite cattle and Amalekite cattle. And Mr. Bryan's back here; he's a cattleman. Maybe he speaks cattle language better than me. And but it all sounds the same to me. It all sounds the same to me. But somehow Samuel said, "Hey, what's this mean right here? This noise I hear, I hear this bleating of the sheep, and what is this going on in my ears?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites." And we've talked about this many times, and I'm, it's just how it is. We'll talk about this before. I don't mind if you mess up. Like in my job, I don't mind if you mess up. You just need to own it. Just own it. If you make a mistake, I made a mistake. I want you to learn from your mistake. I don't want you to keep doing the same mistake. I don't want you to just say, "Oh, well, you know what? He doesn't care if I make a mistake." No, that's not what I said. I want you to learn, and hey, I messed up. I made this mistake. And here's Saul. He didn't want to own this. Well, guess what? When you're the king, you're in charge. And again, like I said, we know from the previous chapter, he was in charge to the detriment of the people. And they did not. His own son called him out and said, we could have had a greater victory had the people ate food that day instead of being hungry. And so, and so here he says, they have brought them up for the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Now here's the other thing about that. I want you to own it, but I don't want you to make excuse. Now, and again, obviously we understand we live in, there's some nuance, sometimes there are reasons And they're excuses. And you just, is this a reason or is this an excuse? But some people are really good with excuses. Why didn't you get your job done? I don't want to hear any of that. You should have got your job done. But sometimes like, hey, I had to take my wife to the emergency room. That's why I went to church. That's why I went to church Wednesday night. Okay, that's a reason. I get it. And so here's Saul, and he's blaming the people. And he said, look, we have this great reason. Here's our reason why we did it. We're gonna sacrifice. We're gonna sacrifice to God. And Samuel's gonna say it to him, and in a minute. But I read this out of Henry, and Matthew Henry said, obedience was the law of innocency. But sacrifice came because sin entered into the world, and is a feeble attempt to take away that which obedience would have prevented. And I thought that was a pretty good quote, Brother Parks. And so this whole chapter, again, we're going to spend 45 minutes talking, but this whole chapter is simply just obey. All Saul had to do was just be obedient. And so in verse number 16, then Samuel said to Saul, stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord has said to me this night. And he said, say on. I think he's still, part of his, whenever he talks to him in verse 23 about rebellion as the sin of witchcraft and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry, there is an arrogance in that stubbornness. There is an arrogance in that stubbornness. And I think when he said, say on, he thought, he ain't going to say anything to bother me. Go ahead and say it. Say whatever you want to. I'm the king. Say on. Verse 17, Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee king over Israel. And the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, go and utterly destroy the Amalekites and fight against them until they be consumed. So again, he said, when you were little in your own sight, and we've studied it, I don't have to bring it back up again, but you remember that how God brought him to Samuel, and how God showed him he was going to be king, and how when it came time for it to be publicly announced, he's hiding amongst the stuff, how he was little in his own sight. But it didn't take very long for him to veer off the path of being little in his own sight to being too big even for God. And if you're so big that you don't need to obey God, you've gotten too big for yourself. If you're so big in your Christianity that, you know what, I can just do what I want to do, you've gotten too big for yourself. If what God says and what the Bible says is, I'll do it my way, you've gotten too big for yourself. And so, he said, verse 19, wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? And look in verse 20, again, like when he said, say on, with an arrogant attitude. Verse 20, and Saul said unto Samuel, yea, I have obeyed. So now he's arguing with the man of God. I don't know. I don't really think that's a real good spot to be in. I really don't think that's a real good spot to be in, especially the fact that this man of God laid up all night long praying and trying to get out of saying what he's going to have to say. I really don't think it's a real good spot when it was God that told the man of God, this is what I want you to say to him. This wasn't Samuel's issue with Saul. This was God's issue with Saul, and Samuel was the messenger. And a lot of people get angry at the messenger, but they forget that the message came from God. And they'll go find them a different messenger who won't ever deliver the message from God. They'll deliver the message that'll tickle their ears, and that's what they want to hear. You can fill up a church in 2025 as long as you don't preach against sin. You can fill up a church and preach on love all you want to. God is love, and God will forgive you, and he's both of those things. But if you start preaching on the holiness of God, and that even in 2025 we should be obedient, you're going to start losing people. And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Well, he wasn't supposed to bring Agag. Even in his defense of himself, he said, I've brought up Agag. You weren't supposed to bring him up. Verse 21, but the people, he said, I have obeyed, but the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed. Again, the first time we did security training here, Mr. Moultrie said, if you have an incident, the best thing for you to do is just keep your mouth shut. Say, look, I want a lawyer. I need to talk to a lawyer. I've got this guy that's going to be my advocate, and he's going to talk for me. He said, because a lot of people talk themselves into handcuffs. If they just be quiet, everything would have been fine. But they talk themselves into handcuffs. And Levi's not in here, but Levi watches a bunch of the defensive training videos and like the where people analyze after a shooting has happened and stuff like that. And we talk about it from time to time. And you'll see that. It's the same thing with firing a warning shot. You think, oh, I didn't want to shoot somebody, so I fired a warning shot. They take that as, well, you really weren't in fear for your life if you fired a warning shot. But people talk themselves into handcuffs. Well, in both verses right here, Saul has talked himself into the fact that he's guilty. Number one, because he said he brought Agag, but number two, he says that the people did it, but which should have been utterly destroyed. Now, sometimes you just don't understand sometimes you just don't understand the assignment. Sometimes with my kids, I'm like, hey, what did I say? And if I don't get them to read it back to me, they don't understand the assignment. Sometimes they're like me and they just check out mentally. We're out. And they don't understand the assignment. But Saul understood the assignment. The assignment was utterly destroy. And he says it, utterly destroy. So in verse 22, it says, and Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? So he's asking Saul a question. He's asking him a question. And we should ask ourselves, again, like I said, and I understand we live in a different age. I understand that Jesus died for our sins. I understand all of that. But it's just as important this day, even though we can get forgiveness and we can go directly to God and we can ask for forgiveness. I understand all of that. But that's not pleasing to God. Obedience is what is pleasing to God. Obedience is what is pleasing to God. He said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offering? He said, God told you to do this. And in an effort to circumvent the system, and honestly, I think they were trying to circumvent the system. I think they were going to take the best of the cattle, because they took the best of the cattle and the best of the sheep, and I think they were going to come and they were going to do a trade. They were going to take their wore-out cow and offer it for a sacrifice and bring this new cow in and start a new herd with better cattle. I think that's what's going to happen, but that's an assumption by me. But God wanted those cattle slain where that battle took place. God wanted those sheep slain where that battle took place. God wanted that king slain where that battle took place. And anything else from that was disobedience. And no amount of, we were going to bring them and we were going to offer them on the altar. He wanted those cattle offered on the battlefield, not on an altar. You're like, I was going to do it, but I wanted to make a big show in the church. God didn't want you to make a show in the church. God didn't want you to make a big show in the church. God wanted you to do it out there. And so he said, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. He said, I'm going to answer, Saul, I'm going to answer the question for you. I'm going to answer the question for you. Because you're going to come up with another excuse why you did it like you were supposed to. But I'm going to tell you, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion. Now, again, sometimes we have to make these statements to kind of bring things home with people. And if you told your child, for those of us who have children in here, that you're practicing witchcraft, they'd be like, I'm not practicing witchcraft. But God said through Samuel, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. It's as the sin, it's just as bad. And you think about it in 1 Samuel chapter number 28, I think God used this point through Samuel, because in 1 Samuel 28, verse number 3, it says, now Samuel was dead, and all Israel lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. In verse number 7, then said Saul unto the servants, seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her, inquire to her. And his servant said, behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And verse number 9, and the woman said unto him, behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that hath familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die? So here it was Saul that put away the familiar spirits. And Samuel just told him that your rebellion was just as bad as that sin that you hate. That sin that you hate, that sin that you despise. And I imagine if I had us make a list in here and be like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, write what you think are little sins and what you think are big sins. And I imagine some of us would probably have the same answers, but a lot of us would rank one thing above another. And so here Samuel is using something that he knows that Saul hates. He knows that he hates witchcraft. And he said, your rebellion is just as evil as those people that you said they're all out of my kingdom. I don't want a single one of these people in my kingdom. I want every one of them gone. And Samuel said, your rebellion was just as bad as that. He said, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And stubbornness. Now, you don't hear that word very much anymore. I used to hear it a lot when I was a kid. Maybe there was a reason why. But you don't hear that word as much anymore. At least I don't hear it as much anymore, that someone's just stubborn. We went to, where was that? Was that, I think it was Brother Fraser. Lady sang a song. Every once in a while, that people in church will sing a song. And I tell you what, it's something else. And the song was, don't be horse-headed and stubborn as a mule. And so, Luke, maybe sometime the choir, maybe the youth choir could sing that song sometime. But it was an interesting song. But anyway, stubbornness, you don't hear that word anymore. Now it's because all the kids are on, they're all ADHD and they're all on Ritalin and stuff. But anyway, some people are just stubborn. They're just stubborn. And the word stubborn here is insolent, arrogant, or presumptuous. And again, like I said, a lot of times we look at stubborn as like, but you see that in Saul right here. You see the arrogance of I have obeyed. You see the arrogance whenever Samuel comes up and he's like, blessed be thou, and blessed be thou of the Lord. I have obeyed. And so here he is, and Samuel's like, hey, that stubbornness, that arrogance that I see in you right now, and again, like I said, you see it. You ever talk to someone that you knows they're not in a good spot? And sometimes you talk to them, you kind of heart-to-heart talk to them, and you're so sincere, and they're kind of smirking, like, you're not getting through to me. You're not getting through to me. And I hear what you're saying, but I'm not. And so that's where Saul was. He said, stubbornness is as iniquity, and this iniquity right here is trouble and wickedness. Iniquity and idolatry. And we know that God hated idolatry. Leviticus chapter 19, Leviticus chapter 26, and also 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm not going to take the time to get into that this morning. But God hated idolatry. God hated this wickedness. Or he hated these things. And he said, your stubbornness, your refusal, your refusal to obey, your rebellion because God said, I want it done, and I want it done exactly this way. Now, there are some times where God didn't tell them how to do it. Or sometimes God didn't tell them how to do it. And so there's some grace there. There's some grace. But when God said, this is exactly how I want it to be done, this is exactly what I want done, then the only thing you can do and be right is exactly how God wants it to be done. Especially when he put it in your power to do it. It was so easy. And I think that God was actually, this was Saul's last chance to get right. I think this was his last chance to get right. He'd already messed up by offering the sacrifice. and God said, and God told him what's going to happen to him then. But here's a chance to redeem himself, for lack of a better word. Here's a chance to prove that he's changed and that he's willing to follow God and follow God with his whole heart. And instead of following with his whole heart, he said, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do the things that I want to do. So in verse number 24, and Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned. Now, there's a bunch of times that you read, I have sinned. I'd say a bunch, maybe 8, 9, 10 times in the Bible. But most of the time, the people that say, I have sinned, they're not really getting right. A couple times they were, but most of the time, if you read after what happens, they weren't really getting right. And sometimes you know the answer. Oh, I know, I'm going to get Samuel to leave me alone. I'm just going to say, all right, you're right. You're right. I've sinned. You're right. I've sinned. You're right, Samuel. Whatever. And sometimes you talk to people and you're like, they don't care. They don't care. They acknowledged that they were wrong, but they really didn't care that they were wrong. And unless there are consequences, yeah, okay, I've sinned. And I feel like that's how Saul was. I feel like he's like, okay, Samuel, all right, whatever. I have sinned. For I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. And sometimes you see it. Sometimes you see it like someone gets in trouble. And when we used to when we used to go do the jail ministry, which Justin's here this morning, he knows. Sometimes it's all about just getting me past the man. If God will just do something for me on my court date, I'm good. Now, they don't say that. They don't come out and say it. But the fact that you go and you testify on their behalf, and this guy said he got saved, and he's doing wonderful, and then they get out on Friday, hey, I'll see you Sunday, and they don't show up. And they don't show up on Wednesday, and they don't show up the next Sunday, and a few weeks later you look in the Gordon Gazette, and they're back in jail. And then they start looking for God again. And I feel like that's where Saul was right here. He's like, yeah, I've sinned. And yeah, you're right. I didn't fully obey. Yeah, you're right. But it was the people's fault. Still it was the people, and I shouldn't have let the people do it. And again, I mean, you come to, like if you've done something and you're under conviction, you can come down and get saved. Or you come down, and if that's your attitude, you're going to get up lost. Again, you can 1, 2, 3 repeat after me. You can read the sinner's prayer all you want to, but if this is your attitude, you're getting up lost. Verse 25, now therefore I pray thee, pardon my sin and turn again with me that I may worship the Lord. And so he's like, just pardon me. Just get it over with. Pardon me. Let me worship, and then you go on about your business, and I'm going to go on about mine. Verse 26. Samuel said unto Saul, I will not. He said, I'm not going to do it. Just because you said I have sinned, and just because you're like, yeah, you're right, I didn't obey, I'm not seeing it. Again, for those of you with children, you know when you discipline your child, did that discipline make it through? If they're still rising up in anger, it didn't make it. Your point didn't hit home. There needs to be some more discipline. But then there are other times where you don't have to break out a switch. They're already broken. And Saul was not broken here. He was not broken. He was not convinced until this moment. Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee. And here was the moment when Saul realized, oh, wait a second. You mean to tell me, as the king, that I just said I've sinned and that I would like to worship, and you're not going to do it? Oh, this is different. Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord. Not just the first part, not just when God said, hey, I want you to do this, but he rejected everything Samuel said up to this point. Everything Samuel said up to this point, he's like, sure, whatever. Sure, whatever. It's fine. No big deal. It's fine. He said, thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. He said, God's rejected you. He said, you thought this matter was just, it's fine. It's just a little disobedience. It's fine. It's just a king. It's fine. It's just the cattle. It's fine. It's just the sheep. It's fine. You thought it was a minor thing. And God said it was a major thing. And I've said this before. I imagine we're all probably going to get to heaven, and we're going to find out we majored on some minors and minored on some majors. I truly believe that, and that we'll find some things out. We're like, man, we should have paid more attention to that verse, and should have maybe minored in some things that we majored in. But in verse 27 it says, as Samuel turned to go away, Samuel delivered the message. He said, I'm not going to return with thee. I'm not going to worship with you. And this is why God has rejected you from being king. And once he delivered the message, he said, I'm out of here. He wasn't going to do it. And Saul reached out and took a hold of his mantle, upon the skirt of his mantle, and it rent. And no good prophet, no good preacher will let an incident like that go to waste. And so he said, and Samuel said unto him, the Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day. He's sitting there holding a piece of mantle in his hand. He's sitting there holding that piece of mantle in his hand. And Samuel said, God rent the kingdom from you. Just like when you grabbed that mantle and it tore. Because of your rebellion, God took the kingdom from you this day. And have given it to a neighbor of thine. That is better than thou. Now, again, like I said, we're not going to go into it. We're going to do something different. But this laid the groundwork for Saul's hatred of David. Right here. Here is Samuel telling him that God has given the kingdom to a neighbor. Not to Jonathan, not to one of his other sons, but to a neighbor of thine. But here's the part that ate Saul up for the rest of his life. That is better than thou. He said, God's got someone else in mind to be king over Israel. And that person that's going to be king over Israel, he's not going to be like you. He's not going to be like you. When God gives a command, he's going to obey. And when he disobeys, he's going to get right. Again, we're not going to get into it, but we know David didn't do everything perfect. He didn't do everything perfect. But what is your attitude when you don't do things right? Again, I mean, it's 2025. And we're the same way. We don't do everything perfect. We're not sinless perfection people. But what is your attitude when you do wrong? What is your attitude when you fail? What is your attitude when you've done wrong? Is it an arrogant attitude? Is it, once saved? Again, like I said, they mock people for saying once saved, always saved, but those words are true. But they make it out like we take advantage of that. Oh, once saved, always saved, I'm good. I can do whatever I want to. And that's not our attitude, or shouldn't be. But if that is your attitude, you have a problem. But he said, it's rent from thee, and that is better than thou. And he said, and also, the strength of Israel will not lie nor repent. For he is not a man that he should repent. He said, look, it's done. It's sealed. It's sealed in the mind of God that he has permanently rejected you from being king, that he's going to take your kingdom from you. And we understand it didn't happen right away. And sometimes, again, whether it's with your child, whether it's you in your Christian life, if you know you did wrong and God didn't punish you immediately, I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, I did wrong, and oh, the lightning didn't strike. Like God strikes people with lightning. Like the lightning didn't strike immediately, so maybe God didn't care, or God didn't notice. And so just because it doesn't happen immediately doesn't mean it's not going to happen. This doesn't happen immediately. We know there are many years that pass from this moment right here until Saul is dead and David is king. But David is anointed king in the next chapter. Verse 30, then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders of my people. Again, we talked about this a long time ago. I just need it to appear. I just need the appearance that it's okay. Okay, I know it's not okay, but I just need the appearance that it's okay. Turn again with me that I may worship the Lord thy God. He didn't call him his God. He didn't mind saying I and my, but when he talked about the Lord, he said he's your God. So Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. And I don't even claim to understand that. I don't understand what he was trying to do there. Verse number 32, then said Samuel, bring ye hither to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came unto him delicately. He's like, I think I've made it. I think I'm just going to come up. I'm going to walk softly. I'm going to talk softly. I'm going to be real kind. And said, surely the bitterness of death is past. And Samuel said, as thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Sometimes you're going to have to stand and watch somebody else be obedient to God where you should have been and could have been. Sometimes you're going to stand and look and say, that person, I don't know if you're called to preach or not, but sometimes people run from the call to preach, and you'll stand and watch and say, that should have been me up there. That could have been me up there. Sometimes you'll stand and watch and be like, man, I should have done that. And Saul had to stand there and watch Samuel. In verse 34, then Samuel went up to Ramah, and Saul went to the house to Gibeah of Saul, and Samuel came no more to see Saul. God was done. God was done with Saul because God told the man of God, don't go back. There's no worse place to be than when a man of God reaches out and tries to get to you and get to your heart, and then God says, just leave him alone. Just leave him alone. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul. It's going to crush that man of God's heart when you don't obey. And God says, I'm done with him. Thank you.